following podcast contains spoilers and rude words. We watch the thing. We watch the thing. Hello everybody and welcome to another week of We Watched a Thing. This week, I'm lucky enough to be joined by a true podcasting legend. Coming up to their 10th anniversary, it's JD from InSession Film. How you doing, mate?
Hey, doing very well. Thanks for having me on. I'm really glad to be here, especially for this movie we're about to get into. So, I'm super excited. Thanks for having me.
No, thanks for coming. I'm really excited to chat about this movie, and this is the kind of movie that I was like, okay, I need someone classy to talk about this.
I appreciate that you think of us that way.
So, shall we get straight into it then?
Yeah, sure. Let's get into it.
All right. This week, we are talking about Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is a 2022 American science fiction black comedy action film, is how it's been described on Wikipedia. Mm-hmm. Written and directed by the Daniels, Dan Kwan and Daniel Scheinert. It stars Michelle Yeoh, Stephanie Su, Huy Quan, Jenny Slate, Harry Shum Jr., with James Hong and Jamie Lee Curtis. And what is it about, JD?
Oh, boy.
I love throwing my guess in the deep end with that.
I will start off by saying this. It is about an aging Chinese immigrant who is swept up in an insane adventure where she alone can save the world by exploring other universes connecting with the life she could have led. Thank you, IMDb, for that.
That is a nice succinct way of getting into it.
Yeah, that's the very superficial basis of what this movie is.
So straight off the top, given how kind of bizarre this movie is, it's an A24 release, of course. It's been doing extremely well. It's done quite well at the box office so far, and reviews have been, extremely renowned. I've got one friend who didn't love it, but still enjoyed it. Even people I know who haven't loved this movie have been able to appreciate it at least.
Yeah.
Are you on the love it side or are you on the appreciate it side?
Before I get to that, do you like the Daniels' previous film, Swiss Army Man, from 2015?
So I actually haven't got to it yet. So I've just added it to my watch list this week because I'm very, very interested, especially after seeing this.
In terms of style and how bizarre this film is, Swiss Army Man is very much the same. And at the time, in 2015, I was completely blown away by it. Absolutely loved it. And so when they announced this project, it became one of my most anticipated that I was looking forward to. And in January of 2019, that's when the news dropped that this film was supposedly coming out. So when we did our most anticipated of the year, this was in my top 10. It was in my top 10 of 2019. Yeah. And then, of course, it kept getting delayed, which we've come to find out over the last few weeks. They had 5 people working for all the visual effects of this movie. That was part of it. Then, of course, there was the pandemic, and that delayed it as well. So it's been in post-production for a really long time.
Yeah. That's some high hype for you to be waiting that long.
Yes, I've been waiting 3+ years for this movie to come out. And so the fact that it's come out and it's been well reviewed and people are liking it, it's doing well at the box office, I can't even begin to articulate how much that makes me happy. But to answer your question, I absolutely love this film. In fact, I think it is my favorite movie of the year so far.
There we go. That's what I like to hear.
And the first thing that comes to mind after watching this has to be about the oversaturation of Hollywood, right? Because in the discourse, people are always talking about the lack of originality in film and superhero movies and sequels and remakes and all of these movies that we tend to get from the Hollywood system. And if you complain about those movies, but then skip out on this one, you should just stop watching movies. Just quit. Yeah. It's not for you, because this film is original. It is unique. It is a one-of-a-kind movie. And it's so bonkers. It is so incredibly weird, but it's wildly creative. It's very funny. It's
hilarious,
There are references to other movies that had me howling. The 2001 sequence nearly had me on the floor. There's a Ratatouille reference that is, oh my God, incredible. I absolutely love it. There's an orifices fight scene that is somehow both hysterical and painful simultaneously. And I don't even know how to describe this rock sequence that we get at the end of the film.
So touching. Who would have thought you could care so much about rocks?
I know, right? It is. It's a moment that should not work, and yet it's somehow captivating. It's moving, as you're saying. But that's the brilliance of the Daniels and what they do with this film. There are montages and sequences here that you've just never seen before in cinema. And oftentimes it's not only innovative in terms of craft and editing, but somehow they're able to tonally render levity while never losing sight of what's bubbling underneath in terms of existential dread and the human connection, specifically familial connection. For as funny as this film is, and boy, is it scintillating in its humor, but it packs a wallop emotionally. Those final sequences near the end of the film are as moving as I've seen out of anything the last 5 years, or even the last 10 years since we've been doing InSession Film, which we can certainly get into as this conversation goes. But there's some incredible stuff here on fighting for your family and demonstrating kindness that truly took my breath away. So yeah, this film, as we joked, I've been waiting for it for 3 years, and it more than delivered.
Yeah, see, I'm kind of. So I firstly start this off. I loved this film as well. I'm a little bit on the other side of the fence that I knew nothing about this movie. I'm a weird movie podcaster where I do my best to stay completely away from any kind of movie news. I never know what's coming out.
Yeah,
I haven't watched a trailer in 8 years, 9 years, except for what I see at the cinemas.
Yeah.
So I hadn't seen a trailer for this film at all. I knew absolutely nothing going in. And I'm going to come straight out with a B Dizzle's big call right up here at the front. B Dizzle's big call. I think that this is the best film that I've seen in the last 5 years.
Wow. Okay.
I loved this movie so much from start to finish. And I agree with you. Everything about it is so well crafted. Like, when you think about how expert the pacing and the writing has to be for you to be able to cut from a scene of a raccoon on somebody's head controlling them to Jamie Lee Curtis dancing with hot dogs for fingers to an emotional wallop between these family members, and for you to still care about that after laughing so heartily is incredible. It's so well put together.
It really is. And that does speak to the magic of the Daniels and their filmmaking here. They're able to create these wildly innovative scenarios in terms of the premise of this film and the bizarre lengths they're willing to go to within this lore that they set up. And there's a lot of consistency to that. That's really interesting. But the beating heart of this film is this rich thematic allegory as it relates to existential dread and family, and how our central character goes about navigating the what ifs in her life, her husband, her daughter, which she's completely disconnected with. The heart of that, the poignancy of that is always there, even when the film gets aesthetically into these just bizarre scenarios. And the craftsmanship in those scenarios is it's out of bounds. It's absolutely bonkers. And yeah, they do such a great job of creating these environments that are so engaging and mesmerizing, like from an action standpoint or from a time jumping standpoint. And yet you're so utterly invested in what's happening emotionally. The way they strike that balance is just phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that amazes me most is just, looking at the editing of this film, the amount that this movie jumps around. You're seeing different timelines, some of them very similar to each other, some of them so outrageously out of this world. And you're seeing them literally, as the film states, all at once. And yet you never lose flow. You never get confused about where you are in the story or what is happening. It just flows so beautifully from one scene into the next.
It does. I completely agree. And I think I'll use that as a jumping point here, and forgive me if I ramble on here a little bit, but I do want to talk about what I think is so rich about this movie, because I mentioned that it is so rich as an allegory, and there is a lot to parcel out of this film thematically. When you look at Evelyn, played wonderfully by Michelle Yeoh in this film.
She is amazing in this movie, yeah.
Absolutely. But early on, they do a great job of establishing her existential dread, this overwhelming sense of banality that she feels. Her relationship with her husband, Wayman, is on the rocks. He's seeking divorce because of Evelyn's internal aimlessness and how that's affecting their relationship. Then there's her ethos toward her daughter, which is rife with insecurity and closed-mindedness because her daughter, Joy, is gay, and that doesn't sit well with her. She's not satisfied with her daughter's weight. She doesn't love her tattoos. There's a vivid disconnect between the two that's left her daughter, Joy, feeling quite removed from her mother. That shot of Joy as she's driving away in the car early on is so heartbreaking. And through this insanely bonkers multiversal adventure that the film takes us on, Evelyn goes on this journey of realizing her banality is simply a matter of perspective. I think that's what's so weirdly moving about that rock sequence near the end of the film, despite how funny it is. But it's this moment where the film reiterates just how insignificant we are in the larger universe, which can be seen narcissistically, as is the case with Joy in that moment. But for Evelyn, it ironically gives her perspective. We're all given a small moment in time, and what gives us purpose isn't fame and fortune, but rather love and family. And that sounds simple, but I love that the film wrestles with how complicated that often is. There's a duality to it, because at one point Evelyn gets drunk and she signs the divorce papers, realizing that maybe separating is best for her and her husband Wayman, or that she has to let her daughter go. That for Joy to be happy, she has to let her daughter be away from her. And for a brief moment, she relents to that idea. However, circling back to the main allegory of the film, there's something profound about fighting for your family, fighting for those relationships, despite how murky they are. But again, there's a duality to it, because how you fight is important. It may have been admirable, but throughout a lot of the film, Evelyn was fighting without clarity, without joy, pun intended. And once she embraced kindness, she has this epiphany that comes about thanks to her husband, Wayman. Ironically, she was able to see her truth, that her life is messy, her family may be messy, but it's worth going through the mess together. Oh, I love that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously this, like you said, thematically there is so much to unpack. Like, the movie has a lot to say about family and stuff, as you said. One thing that I also love about the film is the way its comment on just life in general. And I think you kind of said it there, life is messy. And I love that even before she kind of enters this multiverse, you can see already that through Evelyn's eyes, she is already having to look at everything everywhere all at once, which is we all are all the time. And particularly women, I think, and particularly mothers, their heads are in a million places all the time. You know, I need to do this, I need to do that, what's happening with this. And I love the way that the film almost juxtaposes by showing how similar regular life is to this kind of concept of the multiverse. It's just crazy.
It is crazy. I think that's what's so great about what the Daniels do here in terms of giving Evelyn this potential dream scenario, because one of the multiversal angles that she goes to in this place is this life that could have been, as it relates to fame and fortune and being a movie star, when she doesn't have her daughter or her husband weighing her down. And she gets a glimpse of that. She's allured to that. And, you know, we joked about this when we talked about this movie in our review, because obviously those sequences are inspired, aesthetically speaking and tonally, romantically, inspired by Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love, a movie that I absolutely adore. I never thought I would say this out loud, but if there was ever going to be an American remake of that movie, in the hands of the Daniels, yeah, I think I'd be okay with that because, man, they mimic Wong Kar-wai so well. And I love what those sequences do emotionally toward the end of the film in terms of flipping that idea of allure on its head when she realizes her own emotional isolation and the what if flips on its head and it becomes this idea of, again, fame and fortune doesn't mean anything if all I do is go home and I'm alone at night and I'm miserable.
Yeah. Like you said, I love all the allusions to other pop culture, other movies, music. I love the little references to Absolutely, Story of a Girl.
Oh, yeah.
Your hair never falls in quite the same way. And then the next couple of times she enters a multiverse, I couldn't help but notice that a version of that song was playing in the background in about 3 or 4 of the different universes she enters. And it's just this nice little touch that's just so funny to me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the music all around, the score here is really great. Yeah, the references, and sometimes they're obvious. Sometimes they're these little references. Like the Wong Kar-wai stuff won't stand out if you've never seen his films. Whereas the Ratatouille stuff, a little bit more obvious. That, or the rock stuff at the end, I think has like 2001 vibes to it a little bit. Yeah. And can we talk about that for anyone listening that hasn't seen this film? Obviously, we're talking spoilers here, so I'm assuming that's not the case. But still, that moment it's a silent film, right? Where it's just two rocks visually having this dialogue through text on the screen. Yeah. No music, no dialogue. It's very quiet. It's utterly hysterical. I've never seen anything like, and it comes so randomly, it feels like. Yeah. I love it.
I was really happy when I saw this film that the cinema I was in was fairly full, which it's only showing in one cinema where I live. It's only showing on one screen, a couple of times a day. But I was really happy to see that it was so full. The entire audience was laughing hysterically during that scene.
It's so good.
When the words "ha ha ha" come up on text, and then Joy's response is "ha ha ha ha."
Yeah, so good.
It's gold.
It's so good. But and as random as it feels, and in terms of execution, it's very funny. And my crowd was very similar. They were laughing throughout the entire thing that first time we see it. And it's certainly meant to come across as very funny, which is a bit ironic, I think, because the dialogue itself, for the most part, taps into Evelyn's existentialism.
Oh, 100%.
And the disconnect between her and her daughter. So at the heart of that conversation, and it's actually still very moving. It's very poignant. Again, the Daniels never losing sight of what's bubbling underneath the surface. Yet the exchanges between them, it is very funny, and they strike a great balance. And I tell you what, the brilliance of this film. When I knew this film was truly special, again, circling back to what I was saying earlier about this whole idea of fighting for your family, because there comes that moment where Joy says to Evelyn, "You need to let me go." And she says, "Yes, you can go." And there's a montage circling back to all these various multi-universal sections that we had seen before. And one of them is the rock sequence, and the daughter rock tumbles over the cliff and falls away. And then a few moments later, narratively, Evelyn stops Joy from riding off and says, "No, look, I understand we have our differences, and you can go if you feel that's best for you. But I love you, and I want to do this with you. We may not have much in common. Our life might be messy, but it's worth going through this mess together." And, a thematic idea I love, as I mentioned earlier. And then the film circles back to another montage of Evelyn in all these multiversal sections, again, pursuing her daughter further. And then when we get to the rock moment, the mom rock tumbles over the hillside, falling after the daughter rock. Yeah. And I cannot begin to articulate how moved I was by that. I legit shed tears over that. And it's out of context. It's actually this funny gag. It's just two rocks falling over this hillside.
Yeah.
And I was in tears. And that is the brilliance of this film. They somehow evoke this deep, profound emotion over two rocks falling over a hillside. It is unbelievable.
I'm so glad. I feel so justified because I was just about to get to that. I cried as well. So that was probably the first time. And then for the next kind of 20, 25 minutes as the film ends, I was on and off teary.
Yeah.
I used to get ragged on a lot because, I cry in movies, but it has been a while. The last time I cried in a movie was honestly rewatching Titanic about a year and a half
Oh, wow. Okay. I love Titanic.
Whereas... Yeah, but this is the first time in quite a while that I've actively shed tears. And the fact that this movie made me cry and laugh so hard, I agree with you. That's when I knew that this movie was something really special. Can we talk about the acting in the film?
Sure, yeah.
I mean, so you mentioned Michelle Yeoh. She is fantastic in this film. She's easily the best performance I've seen this year.
Yeah.
But... Huy Quan as well, who people will remember as Short Round mainly, or the kid from the Goonies.
Yep.
He is fantastic in this film. He stole every scene he was in. For me,
completely agree. And it's so funny because on our show, we have the InSession Film Awards that we do every year, which obviously isn't bogged down in politics and marketing like the Oscars is. We typically just go for whatever we think is the best. It would not surprise me at all if his performance is mentioned in some way, shape, or form when it comes to the InSession Film Awards at the end of the year, whether it be a genuine best actor or best supporting actor performance, or maybe a best surprise performance, which is a category that we have, because he is so good. Either way, he should be recognized in some way, shape, or form. And God willing, by the time the Oscars does roll around next year, that him and Michelle Yeoh are not lost in the conversation. And the fact that this film is so well reviewed and it's doing so well at the box office is, if A24 put some money behind it, it might have a slight outside shot. Either way, that is to say, I completely agree with you. Michelle Yeoh on a ridiculous level. And she often, especially within the Hollywood system, doesn't get these kinds of meaty roles all the time. And so for her to have this, I mean, she takes full advantage. She's great. But Kevon Kwan, who hasn't been in movies recently. In fact, I saw an interview this last week where he said after the Goonies, a lot of roles dried up. Like, it was hard for him. Like, he basically fizzled out of acting, not because he didn't want to do it, but because the roles just weren't there for him. So he ended up doing stuff behind the scenes for the last 20 years or whatever. But he wanted to get on camera again because he was inspired thanks to Crazy Rich Asians and its success, which is a whole nother thing in and of itself that's fascinating. So he gets in contact with an agent, gets hired to be a part of this movie, and he is ridiculously good. He's so good,
outstanding.
He's so good, especially because he's playing essentially two very different characters, right? Where Wayman Prime, who is from a different part of the multiverse, who is trying to help Evelyn survive all of these, nefarious circumstances they find themselves in. That guy is smart. He's intelligent. He's very knowledgeable when it comes to, martial arts and action and all that sort of stuff. And then Wayman, the earthly presence that is the husband to Evelyn, that dude is a little insecure himself. He's more soft-spoken, a little bit more volatile, and reeling from guilt because he's the one that is wanting to divorce Evelyn. Like, he's the one that got the papers to start that whole process. I mean, they're two distinctly different characters, and he is able to transfer back and forth so seamlessly.
Yeah.
It's so remarkable.
Definitely. And he's so funny as well.
Oh,
he's
very funny. Yeah.
Like in a lesser film, you would almost be inclined to describe his role as the comic relief just because he provides so much levity. But the film is so funny already that it just, you can't really put it that way, but he is just great. On the Oscars thing, I think the real shame is that because this film has come out in April now, I mean, it's so rare that a movie that comes out this early will still have conversation. I mean, who knows? From memory, the year Parasite came out, I think that was kind of a June release, but being international, it was a little bit staggered. So I don't know. It'd be really nice if this was still in the conversation come Oscar time, because it deserves every piece of praise it gets.
I agree, because, I mean, by that comparison, because I think Parasite, I could be wrong on this, but Parasite, other films that come out in May or that premiere in May and June, oftentimes they come from Cannes. Yeah. And sometimes those films do trickle into award season quite heavily. Now, obviously, this film did not premiere at something like Cannes, as prestigious as that festival is. But the release of this and the festival is only about a month or so apart. It's not that far. A lot of it will really come down to A24. How much money are they willing to put behind this? And they're not Netflix, they're not Apple. They have, historically speaking, they haven't put a ton of money into their Oscar campaigns, comparatively anyway.
Yeah.
They just don't have the resources. They may not even care as much. I mean, I don't know.
Which is a completely fair approach, to be honest.
I agree. No, I completely agree. So it just depends. But this film seems to be doing so well financially and critically that maybe they give it a re-release later in the year. And who knows, maybe, I mean, it'll go on to Apple, I believe, because A24 and Apple have a partnership, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, once more people at home get to see it on top of its box office success, it might have a slight outside chance. Either way, though, I'm just glad that people are watching it. Because this, on its face, it's a movie that's so weird and bizarre. And, important to note as well, it doesn't star white people, which does factor into it a little bit, at least with some audiences. The fact that it's doing so well despite what could be working against it is just insanely awesome. I love that. Absolutely love that.
It helps too. Every time I look at the budget of this film, I'm shocked that you can make a film look this good for $25 million. This is a beautiful looking film.
It is.
The cinematography is gorgeous. The visual effects, like you said, such a small VFX team, and it is really, really, really stunning.
It's so good.
Like, everything is just beautiful about this movie. I love how nicely it's put together.
Absolutely. And for context, again, for anyone listening that may not know of, or have heard this, but Daniel Kwan, one of the directors, came out and said that they basically hired their friends, 5 of them, to do all of the visual effects because things were so backed up within the Hollywood system, they couldn't really get a foot in the door. So they had to look elsewhere. They just hired their friends to do it, which, took a little bit longer than usual, which is why the film was delayed.
This is not a movie with minimal
there's
effects.
A lot.
This is not a movie with minimal anything. This is maximalist to the extreme.
Absolutely.
And even little joke sequences, like the multiverse she enters where she's got an insanely strong pinky. And you just see those muscles bulge on that pinky. Like it's a simple shot, but there's still a lot of work there.
Oh, absolutely. Or I mentioned this in my opening thoughts, but there's an action sequence that involves the orifices of these 2 men going after Evelyn. And the effects there, the blurry effect, everything about that is just incredible. It is so good.
The choice to mosaic those body parts just makes everything funnier. I've always been a fan of censoring something makes it funnier. Like I will often randomly beep a word on this show just because I think beeps are funny. I just think beeps are really funny. Like there is nothing funnier than a really long, outrageously long beep. It's just, it leaves more to the imagination about what does this look like. And even though they're still wearing undies or something at that point, it just makes it so much funnier to blur that out.
I completely agree. It is absolutely hysterical. Like the gag in and of itself is already great, but the blurry effect does make it in many regards. I agree. I love that. Absolutely love that. And then on the other end, you have the puppeteering of the raccoon and the whole Ratatouille gag, which is in and of itself incredible as well. Just the effects all around, just phenomenal, just so
Yeah.
good. Well, I guess one other thing that I could mention that I think is really interesting because, we mentioned earlier that part of Evelyn's journey in this film, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, circles around not just family, broadly speaking, but these closed-minded ideas that she has toward her daughter Joy. I mean, there's a whole through line between her and Raymond as well, which, again, going back to something you said earlier in this conversation, that women, everybody, but especially women and mothers, they're having to think about everything all the time, and that obviously comes through in this film very well because it's her own existential dread, it's her husband Raymond, it's her daughter Joy, it's their lives together as one. There's also the whole tax element of this as well with Jamie Lee Curtis. That's hilarious. So there's a lot going on with that character. But as it relates to Joy, she has these closed-minded ideas as it relates to how her daughter looks, the tattoos, the fact that she's gay, as we mentioned. And I think specifically what's so interesting, and the film does directly tackle this, and this is part of that epiphany that we see at the end of the film that we were referencing earlier, as far as, hey, let's just go through this mess together. That Evelyn has to come to terms with that closed-mindedness, because throughout the film, throughout the bulk of this movie, she is affably fighting for her daughter, even when she finds that her daughter, like the variant of her daughter Joy, is the main antagonist, the quote-unquote antagonist of this film. But the irony is, really, Evelyn is her own antagonist.
Definitely.
Because what's driving her daughter's variant to take these actions wholly comes through because of that closed-mindedness. And so she goes on this journey to fight for her family, but it's still like there's a barrier that's, as affable as it is, there is some sort of barrier that is not allowing things to progress in the ways that she thinks that it should. And which is what I love so much about that whole moment of just let me go, because you get to the end of the film and it could have just ended there. And we would have all loved Evelyn for making that choice because that was the right choice. They're just two very different people. But the whole idea of fighting, I'm going to fight further for my daughter. Yes, you can go, but I'm going to fight for you. That comes off the heels of specifically her coming to terms with her closed-mindedness and realizing that that is the barrier, and that, hey, it's okay if my daughter's gay. There's that whole moment where she lets that out in the open with her father. And man, again, another through line with Evelyn. We learned that her relationship with her father was strained and not very good, which was a part of it as well. So she comes to terms with the tattoo. She comes to terms with who her daughter's sexual identity. She comes to terms with the mess. And that, I think, is important. That to me is what I love about the duality of Evelyn's journey here, because on its face, it's affable that you're fighting for your kids, but how you fight is important, because if you're just fighting but carrying your closed-minded idea still, then it might be fruitless at the end of it. And her like the results that she wanted doesn't come until she realizes she's got to let go of those barriers. And I love that about this film as well. We haven't really mentioned that, but that is such a big part of this movie that I think is so important.
Yeah, I agree. I think the inclusion of Evelyn's father as a character adds so much, because through Evelyn alone, you get to see parenthood from both perspectives. You get to see how you're affected by your parent as well how you affect your children, which is such a huge theme to this film. As you say, Evelyn is almost her own antagonist, because the way she treats Joy through her own closed-mindedness is what creates that villain, essentially. And that's what we're all afraid of as parents all the time. You are constantly afraid of, am I doing things right? You can't help your own closed-mindedness to a certain extent, but you need to, I don't know, it's like, how do you deal with that with children? It's just beautifully shown in this film.
I agree. And just with Evelyn's father as well, and this is my own American myopic lens coming through here a little bit, but it was also fantastic to see James Hong on screen and like by himself, because he's so known for his animation work, whether it be with Disney or Kung Fu Panda, or any of the television stuff that he's done. I mean, he's that voice alone is so recognizable in America.
Yeah.
I'm sure it is in other parts of the world as well. He's got such a distinct voice for animation. And this is, one of the few times, at least in recent years, where he's been on screen as himself, doing a performance. And so it was really nice to have that as well. As jarring as it can be at first to be like, I know that voice so well. And I'm now getting to see his face. But I love his performance here as well. I mean, it's one of those performances that's small in the grand scheme of things, but what he does, like there's these subtle little things he does throughout the film that make sense of that reveal we get at the end that, his relationship with his daughter wasn't great. And that context speaks to why Evelyn is the way that she is with her own daughter as well. So the storytelling and all of that is just incredible. It's brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, and on like voice and language, I think the choice to present the film in that mix of Chinese and English language, is honestly, like, it shouldn't be, but it is a brave choice, because that is going to be a barrier and a turnoff for some audience members. But it just adds that authenticity that just makes this film go to the next level, because
I agree.
That's how people speak. That's how Chinese immigrants living in America speak. They do kind of mix between, even, the film starts and in the first minute, they're flitting between, just Evelyn and Wayman talking amongst each other, flitting between mid-sentence. And it's just, it just sets you, it gets you in the mindset of Evelyn, I think, a little bit better, rather than
I agree
presenting something that might come across as false.
Oh, I completely agree. I love that choice as well. And, if some people feel as if the film is reaching, now I can't speak to Chinese culture specifically, but I live in South Florida, and that way of living is absolutely the way Latino Americans, at least here in South Florida, that's how they speak all the time. They'll flip back and forth between Spanish and English mid-sentence. Yeah. And it's, just the way, immigrants in this country, at least, I'm obviously kind of speaking broadly there, but a lot of them certainly do live that way. And I agree with you. I think that authenticity does factor into the emotional authenticity of this film.
Which I think is really important. When the film does go off in such kind of bizarre tangents at time, having that base of authenticity, it allows you to accept everything else that happens, because you don't, it's hard to call this a fantasy film, because it feels so real and raw at all times. That is, again, going back to really, I feel like the fundamental ethos of this film. As we stated early on, there's such a brilliant and almost sorrowful but very cogent approach to this film in terms of the fantastical and how wild and bizarre it is. But emotionally speaking, everything here is so grounded and so genuine and relatable to some degree or another. And that balance here, it's what makes this film so unique and so one of a kind. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I can't do anything less. I'm a 10 out of 10 on this film, which happens very, very rarely for me. I can't remember the last time I gave a film a 10. I gave The Godfather a 9 and got shunned for that. But this, I love this movie. I walked out of the cinema and I couldn't wait to get back into the cinema and watch it again. So I'm hoping that everyone listening has seen this movie, because spoilers. But if you haven't, go see this movie. Go see this movie as many times as you can so that it gets seen.
Yeah, I agree. It's my favorite film of the year. I can't fathom that this won't be in my top 10 at the end of the year. And like I said, we start doing our InSession Film Awards, it's probably going to be in many other categories, as we get into that. But yeah, I can't recommend it enough either. It's absolutely fantastic. For the purposes of this, I'll give it a 10 out of 10. I'm one of those a-holes that I don't give new films perfect ratings a lot of the time. So like the highest on Letterboxd I'll usually give a new film is 4.5, which is where this sits for me. So, but this is as good like as far as ratings go, this is as high as I'll give any new film for sure.
Yeah. I have nothing to fault about this film. I think its execution right through from the writing to the final output is just so good. Every performance is just so good in this film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. It's pretty flawless top to bottom as far as I'm concerned.
Well, JD, thank you so much for joining me. This has been awesome.
This was
to
fun.
have such a serious conversation about such a funny film.
That is the brilliance of it, though, right? Like, and we could have just spoke 45 minutes about how funny the film is. Like, it's that rich just in terms of the humor.
Yeah. So can you tell everybody where they can find InSession Film and just what you guys do and how wonderful it is?
So you can find us at InSessionFilm.com. That's the easiest way to find everything that we do. So in terms of podcast, we actually have 3 shows, but 2 that run throughout the entire year. So we have our main show, which is myself and my co-host Brendan. That comes out every Tuesday, sometimes Mondays, but early on in the week, and we talk about some sort of new release. Usually it's a bigger release. Then we'll have a top 3 that will go along with it, or if we're in the middle of a movie series, we'll be doing that. Such as like right now we're in the middle of a Steven Spielberg series, so right now we're kind of going through his movies. And then on Friday we have what we call Extra Film, and that's a podcast that also dives into a bunch of movie series. So if you like directors from yesteryear, or if they get into new movies, it's usually those like hidden gems, like the indie movies, or like the ones that kind of fly under the radar. We try to highlight those, spend some time on those, because oftentimes the best movies in a year are the ones that the mainstream has never heard of, because it went out to 2 theaters and then went to VOD, but it's excellent. So we try to pay attention to those as well. And then we have an Oscars podcast that will kind of pop up toward the end of the year for those that like the podcast. But on the website, we also have written content. So we got reviews, we got different essays and lists and all that sort of fun stuff as well. So all the links to everything, links to the podcast, links to our social media. Again, you can find it all at InSessionFilm.com.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would highly recommend checking out the website. It is for any kind of film buff or nerd. It is fantastic. Go listen to these guys. Go read their stuff. It's just it's a lot better than what I put out. So
I appreciate it. And again, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun, especially getting to talk about this movie. I absolutely enjoyed this.
Well, thank you so much. I'll have you back on again for sure. This week I was also lucky enough to guest over on the Countdown podcast, counting down our top 10 movie monologues, which was a lot of fun. The catch was we had to perform them. So, So, I get to crack out some of my famous impressions.
Nice. Yeah, that does sound fun.
All right, and next week I will be getting to The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, which I'm very excited for. Have you seen it yet?
I haven't. I was supposed to go to a press screening this week, but it turns out my other hobby, which is playing hockey, has infiltrated my life. So I will no longer be going to that presser, so I'll have to wait. But I am very, very excited for it as well.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you very much. In the meantime, if you want to get in touch with me, you can do that at wewatchedathing.com or wewatchedathing@gmail.com. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all under the handle at wewatchedathing. If you want to help support the show, you can do that at patreon.com/wewatchedathing, and I'll catch you next week. You're still here? The show's over. Go home. Go. But if you can't get enough of We Watched a Thing, why don't you check out our Patreon page? There's tons of behind-the-scenes content, heaps of bonus episodes. You can get full, unedited videos of each episode recording. You can pick a movie for me to do on the show, or even come and join me while I talk about it. So why don't you head over to patreon.com/WeWatchedAthing. Go watch a movie.